So, welcome again. Thanks for joining this kickoff introduction to emissions reporting season. You're invited. You were invited to this session because you're a global emissions subscriber, and we're very glad that you could make time for this. We're trying something new, as you can tell by hosting this session live. And Adam's going to give you a little bit more insight into that. So, my name's Annabelle Munson. I'm your host and moderator. As I said, the regulatory team thought this would be a good new experiment for all of you who are joining in. Go ahead and get moving. Adam, you have a big group. So I'm going to hand it off to you. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annabelle, and appreciate everybody joining us today. Like Annabelle said, this is a special session only being offered to our global emissions subscribers. I've brought some of my good friends and associates with me to help us execute global emissions reporting. I've got Juan Muniz, our lead from Global Specialist, with me, and Rick Cordes and Chris Johnson from AES Limited, Aviation Emissions Solutions. They partner with us on the registry side and a couple of real subject matter experts when it comes to these emissions reporting programs. So thank you guys for joining me as well. So with that, I want to move through a couple of different things today, and we are going to try to keep this light and conversational. I think it's one of the reasons that we did this is that in the past, and I mean in the past over the last decade plus, we've been supporting this program as it's more and more complex, and there's more and more layers coming out. An email format or written format became longer and longer and longer, and more nuance and more detailed to the point that nobody could really understand what's going on. So we wanted to sit down, put ourselves in the hot seat, try to throw out some high level things happening now. What's the very next item that's up for action, and then look forward a little bit into what's coming for global emissions and sustainability in the future. So the very next thing that's going to happen from Universal that you'll see, and some people we've already been in touch with, is the kickoff and start of our reporting season. So if we've looked at your operations and have deemed you within a certain amount towards the thresholds, we will start the reporting process, the validation process for 2020. If you are not in that bucket, we will be working on 2021 and issuing invoices, renewals, engagement certificates, as well as doing monitoring plan updates and all of that stuff. So that's what's coming up in the very near future for next actions. I'll stop talking for a minute and bring our panel into play here. I wanted to introduce Juan Muniz. Obviously, you guys know him from working with us on the Global Regulatory Services team. But first, Juan, let's take a step back and talk about what's coming next in our mandatory programs, EU ETS and CORSIA.
Sure. Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So we're in the middle now of the 2020 reporting for those of you who met that threshold of 1,000 tons of CO2 for the European Emissions Trading Scheme, EU ETS. Deadlines coming up. They really haven't changed in the past, I would say, 10 years about. So we have Spain coming up for their reporting deadline of February 28th. Those of you who are under Spain member state, that is the deadline for submission of the report. Everyone else usually falls under the March 31st deadline to submit those reports. As you guys know from past years, the carbon offset to offset that report for carbon credits and submission to the member state stays at April 30th. So those deadlines are coming up, and they'll be here before we know it. Again, those are the deadlines for those operators that go above that 10,000 ton threshold. And as Adam stated, we'll be reaching out to you if we notice and if we have that information of those operators who went over that threshold.
Yeah. So Juan, if you have somebody who thinks they might be over the threshold, what's a good best practice for them right now?
Right now is obviously first thing is we want you to validate the information that we have in our emissions portal to make sure that you have all your operations accounted for. If you notice that there are operations that are not listed on there or duplicates, etc., we suggest going to clean them up or have us do it as well as part of the service. If you see that your operations were not loaded into the emissions portal, please be sure to sign in and verify those operations. That way we can determine the number of tons that you emitted for 2020.
So in regards to Corsia, so at EUETS, we still have our mandatory, you talked about the mandatory reporting deadlines, the 28th of February for Spain, 31st of March for most of your other member states, rendering by April 30th. Where does Corsia stand right now as far as any kind of a mandatory obligation for operator?
So for an operator, there will be no reporting for 2019 and 2020 were benchmarking years, what they call benchmarking years. So it's really about monitoring and calculating those emissions for those 2 years. The actual reporting begins in 2021. Right now, there are, unless I'm a little out of the loop, there are no reporting deadlines this year for the 2020 reporting year. Corsia right now is still under a monitoring phase in which all your international operations go into account. Those are flights as small as US Canada, US Mexico, anywhere where the point of origin is one country and the point of destination is a different country. Right now, we are in a monitoring and calculation phase for those operations.
Yeah, so still in that what they call a voluntary phase, which although Universal is, like we said, monitoring and calculating Corsia emissions, we are not volunteering any of our operators that we support into those Corsia programs at this point, unless they're mandated by their particular member state.
That is correct.
And that's really just to avoid extra administration on our clients or on industry that's not required. So let me throw it over to AES for a second. So Juan talked about those reporting deadlines, Chris and Rick, and how we get there and present March 31st, come up with a submitted annual emissions report by March 31st. And just walk us through what happens from there as far as the registry accounts, both for clients that you support through Universal's registry account services, or if an operator is doing it themselves.
Hi, Adam. Yeah, I'm Chris Johnson. I work with Adam and Adam's guys on the EU ETS reporting and compliance side. And as Adam alluded to, we mainly focus on the registry management side. And so part of the things some of the things we do is we open and manage registry accounts. We install our authorized reps into those accounts, and we manage the periodic documentation and that type of thing. And the final step is obviously buying and surrendering of the carbon credit allowances. That's essentially our little, in a nutshell, what we do. In answer to your question, Adam, we wait until the reporting is completed. Once we get that through and we can confirm that the figures are correct, we then different registries or different parts of the registry, the rules are slightly different, but in essence, most of the registries work in respect of the emissions have to be loaded into the registry. Once they've gone in there, we then make sure that it's approved by the various competent authorities and make sure they're happy with them. If they're happy, we then go out and start onto the market to try to purchase the carbon credit allowances at the most competitive rates. As soon as we can find somewhere that's selling them at a good rate or the best rate, we buy them in and then we execute the surrender transaction, and that's it done.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about why somebody would want Chris and Rick to represent them on their registry account in EU ETS.
Well, one of the things we do is we put our own authorized reps into the accounts, Adam, this is the area which seems to cause most operators the biggest amount of hassle, because the level of documentation required there, and it's, criminal record checks, it's legalized documents to prove your abode where you live, and either your passport or some sort of other type of, depending on where you are in Europe, other type of document. So it's hassle, As well as that too, I mean, we mainly get involved in the opening of the accounts. That's where we originally start off. And that's where another very bureaucratic process. We've done it many, many times now. Every different country in Europe does it differently. So we've now got a fair bit of experience to draw on. So I like to think we can smooth that operation through very easily. It takes a lot of hassle from the operator, but so it's really in 2 points. One is getting the accounts open in the first place. The second is putting our authorized reps into the account, so they are then absolved from the process of having to renew their documentation every couple of years, having to, and obviously in various operations people are leaving and joining, so you then have to have all that disruption of putting new people in and new people out and getting all of those legalized documents in place. So that's what we do, and hopefully it helps operators, and I think it's generally appreciated by most.
That's a really good point. And so there's a certainly a customer service aspect of it to it. There's a data privacy aspect of the representative from the company not having to provide their individual information, which they don't want to provide to a foreign country, as well as the familiarity. And you guys are familiar with this system, so when it comes to actually running things, you're not hunting for the right buttons or wondering whether compliance was met, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So we'll take a step back here real quick, and then I'm going to come back to registry accounts in the EU and that what you just mentioned. But Rick, maybe we can talk for a second about, or Chris, about UK ETS and that or the UK breaking away from EU ETS first, and then how it's going to, or how those other members who used to be UK assigned members are going to flow back into EU ETS, and then how we're going to be dealing with UK ETS as a new program.
Yeah, fine, Adam. I'll take that. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that we're very early days of the process, so some of it still needs to be formulated. I don't think anything is actually in stone at the moment. Certainly, as regards the registry area. That's likely to be probably the smoothest area, I would imagine, because everybody, even the UK operators as they are at the moment, administered by the UK, they're all part of the EU registry. So all that's going to happen is those guys that are in that part of the registry will be migrated across into other member states' registries, and that should be pretty seamless, I would hope. We haven't seen it work yet, but that's the indication that we're getting. The reporting side, I think, might be a little bit more problematic, although the impression I get when I speak to people is it all should be relatively seamless. And so I imagine, to say, if you're being migrated from Europe to France, I would imagine you'd be contacted by France and to let you know that, right, this is where you're going to be from now on. These are the documents that we require, if any. And because obviously the emissions plans and all the reporting documents, they exist already. There's no reason why they should start again. Everything's there, so I would hope that they can be inherited from the UK and loaded straight into the various member states. That's my hope, but I need to go away and try and do a bit more digging there, Adam, because the information, I've found it very difficult to try and get hold of any solid information about how that process is going to take place.
Well, and I think that's important for for our clients here to know how we're going to sort this, right? So Universal, Juan, GRS team, Juan and Adam will work on transferring any of the monitoring plans and those kind of administrative steps associated with operators who were previously assigned to the UK. We will be moving those monitoring plans, contact details, and all over. If their registry account needs to be reapplied for, if it needs to be transferred, however that sorts out, we'll be engaging AES to help us with those specific processes of moving those registry accounts or establishing new registry accounts in the new member state.
Sure. Yep.
So UK ETS, maybe one of you guys can tell us really briefly who UK ETS is applicable to now that they are not part of the EU ETS, and maybe some deadlines or actions associated with that program. Yeah,
sure. I mean, I think probably the first thing to say is there's nothing to get worried about for this year. The first reporting year is next year, so we've got essentially 12 months to think about this stuff. There's a couple of things that we probably need to consider. That's the EMPs, the emissions monitoring plans. and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. If you're already submitting a report into the EU ETS this year, and there's going to be fewer operators doing that this year. But if you're already doing that, my understanding from the UK Environment Agency is your emissions plan has already been issued within the ET swap area, and so that should be there for you already. So that part's done. So that's the only thing that you really need to do in that situation is you need to just review that plan, make sure it's still appropriate for you. If it is, nothing to be done in that respect. For operators that aren't actually reporting to the EU ETS this year, the recommendation is that these people that aren't reporting to EU ETS this year, but are expecting to report to the UK ETS in 2022, then the recommendation is that you contact the UK Environment Agency as soon as possible, just to notify them that you have an expectation that you will be reporting to the UK ETS. And that leads on to the next question: how do you know whether you'll be reporting to the UK ETS? Well, the concept of the full scope and the reduced scope that exists in the UK ETS as well as the EU ETS. So essentially, the UK ETS is a mirror image of the UK ETS, very, very similar to. There's a couple of very small points, but essentially it's the same thing. The full scope on the UK ETS is basically if you've any flights that you've performed that land or take off in the EAA, in the European Economic Area, and also any flights that land or take off in the UK or Gibraltar, they're all part of that full scope. So it's essentially the same as the full scope last year in the EU ETS, but we just have to mention the UK and Gibraltar separately because they're no longer in the EAA. So if that's a simpler way of looking at it. And when it comes down to reduced scope flights, and these are obviously the flights that you have to actually buy carbon credits for and surrender for to compensate for these flights, that's defined as a bit like the Swiss one, any flight that takes off in the UK and lands in an EEA state or Gibraltar, or any flight that comes from Gibraltar and flies into the UK. So that's the reduced scope. So everybody here will know their operations. They will know if you visit the UK on a regular basis. But what I would say is, if you generally report to the EU ETS and you visit the UK, then you will almost certainly be reporting to the UK ETS.
Yeah, and especially for this audience, we have so many of our US-based clients, and the UK becomes this hub of the kind of that first stop on traveling into the EU. So what we're doing with our software and our tools is expanding our filters in your global emissions reporting portal. So you will have a UK ETS filter here sometime early spring that will help us monitor, again, taking that total emissions figure for you as an operator and trying to split it up into all of these different mandatory buckets so we can keep an eye against these thresholds. Couple of different things. So Rick, let me ask you a quick question. So Chris was talking about the registry and carbon credits. I know I've been getting a lot of pings lately. There's a lot of news about the price of carbon over in the EU. Can you give us an update there?
Yeah, sure, Adam. As many operators know, is that when this scheme started off, it first came into play about 2010, but the global financial crash occurred in 2008. As a result of that, there were many sort of carbon credits within the system, and that drove down the prices of carbon emissions. So when the scheme got going in 2012 and operators had to report, the price per emission per carbon credit was around €4 at that time. We're now talking about very recently that the highs hit €35. So that's about $41, in US language. So we're talking about a 9-fold increase compared to when the EU ETS first kicked off in earnest in 2012. So yeah, for 1,000 tons of CO2, clearly that now relates to €35,000 as opposed to the 2012 figures, which would have been €4,000. So a massive increase for operators, and probably it has quite an impact on the smaller operators because of the size of their operation and the amount that they're now having to pay out. So yeah, the whole process is obviously geared that each carbon credit is supposed to be an incentive for operators to reduce their flights. How that occurs in reality is another thing, but the idea is to push down global emissions over time. But yeah, the prices have jumped up quite substantially. We got a spot price earlier on today, and they're standing per carbon credit or carbon allowance at 34 euros each. So they're still very, very high. The EU has introduced a market stability reserve in more recent times, and that mechanism is basically going to be used to stabilize the price of carbon credits. So we probably won't see as much fluctuation going forward as we have done historically over the past 10 years or so. But for the time being, carbon credits remain high at around the 34, 35 euros.
Thanks, Rick. That's some really good information, and just something for our operators, especially those who think they might report if they're trying to put together budget numbers, or even EU ETS will continue on into the next few years. As you're thinking about budget numbers, we've jumped up another 10 euro, really, from what we've been setting in the past at around 25. So there's one on here I see in the chat. Lynn Sloan from one of our charter clients says, hey, so what can you address ETS when it comes to a charter company? So Juan, what's the difference, or what's the big difference between commercial operators and private operators when it comes to these emissions programs?
Sure. So the thresholds really are the big difference between the two type of operators. A charter operator or non-scheduled commercial has the ability to be categorized in the 10,000 or 25,000 actually ton threshold, presenting their air carrier certificate or their air operator certificate. If that is presented to the member state, there is a big chance that they can get categorized under a commercial status for EU ETS, and that would increase the threshold from the 1,000 ton threshold that is for private operators to that 25,000 threshold for commercial operators.
Yeah, and what else into that is then if you get a large commercial operator reporting scenario where you're required to report, that also pulls into play our third-party verification as well. So large emitter, commercial, small emitters are exempt for the most part. Commercial, large emitters have a more complicated process than everybody else, I guess is the very easy way to put it.
Correct.
Adam, I just want to give you a heads up on time. We're at about 12:25 currently, just to give you a heads up there. I know that our group, in terms of our subject matter experts, can stay on past that 12:30 mark. But of course, I know everyone has their schedule, but do keep in mind we are recording the session. So should you need to drop off due to your schedule, don't worry, we'll have this out to you later this week. But Adam, just going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, and I think we'll, we've put a lot of information out there. I think we'll kind of pause for Q&A and see what hasn't been answered or what kind of burners are out there from everybody. And I'll keep going through a few of the notes here as well. But one of the ones that we see on the chat is would a flight from the UK to an EU member state count in 2021? So yes, it's going to count in both programs, but in different ways, right, guys? So in UK ETS, that would be an included flight, UK to the EEA, whereas in EU ETS, that would be a full scope flight, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think the UK essentially becomes a third country in that respect. So yeah, in the old terminology.
Yep. So, and that's what's funny about these. It's not, I don't know if it's funny, but we have redundant emissions right now. So when we look at the broader timelines, ETS is maintaining through the 2023 year. Is that right, Chris and Rick?
I didn't catch that, Adam. Could you say, you just broke up a bit? Could you say that again?
EU ETS maintaining through 2023.
For UK for the UK ETS is starting in 2022.
For EU.
Oh, ETS. When you say maintaining, what do you mean by that?
So our current program through 2023, or EU ETS in its current phase through 2023, and then a potential move to Corsia as a broader
fine, yeah.
solution.
Yeah, 2023 is my understanding, Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to have this redundancy, or this duplicitous process of multiple monitoring programs, where you may have a leg that is applicable to Corsia and also applicable to EU ETS, and potentially applicable to UK ETS, and potentially applicable to Swiss ETS, but all in different ways. And whether or not you'd actually have to pay for that leg depends on the program, and depends on how much CO2 you're putting into the air annually. But for Corsia is supposed to be, if Corsia is supposed to be our solution to a much more harmonized process, we are taking a rough road to get there with EU ETS, Swiss ETS, UK ETS, all still in play while Corsia is trying to stand up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only issue is the domestic flights are outside of Corsia, so that's where I think things get a bit stickier. Is because the Green Lobby are pushing for the domestic flights to be included, and because they're not, that they're essentially taken care of in things like the Swiss ETS and the UK ETS.
Which is actually a question that we've gotten as far as requirements for domestic reporting or domestic tracking. Right now, especially focused on the US, there is no requirement for reporting or offsetting any kind of carbon for those domestic legs. However, our program is designed to be able to capture those domestic legs if you wish to participate in voluntary carbon offset, sustainability and that program. So our system is capable of tracking those emissions. That way you have the ability to know exactly what you're outputting in those domestic legs.
That's a good point, one, for sure. Mm-hmm. Let's see, we just had one come in from Bill in the chat. Let's see, just to confirm, as a member of UWA Corsa, we do all the reporting for our 91 operations. So it's for a 91 operation, depending on how many aircraft you have. Obviously, there are some large 91 operators out there who could potentially go over Corsia thresholds. But for a small emitter as a 91 operator, it'd be unlikely that you're going to officially report for Corsia. But yes, we will still be managing that data set to say this is exactly what is applicable to Corsia, and if you were exempt because you had 2,000 tons of CO2 versus the 10,000 ton threshold, you'll have that in a record or report to be able to show that you've met your obligation or are exempt because of X, not. And I've talked with a lot of people on this call in 101, but it's the difference between proving an exemption and documenting an exemption versus an assumption of an exemption. And the Corsia threshold is 10,000 in a year. But again, as mentioned, Corsia captures a much broader data set, a much broader scope of all international flights. So anything from country A to country B, anywhere in the world. So I know we're at 12:30, Annabelle. Do we have any other questions that had been submitted via email or something that we might be missing?
So I did want to check, and I know Laura Everington's been in the background as well. So from an expertise standpoint, I don't know if I'm stepping on anyone's on information that I missed, but we did have a few questions that were submitted earlier via email that I know you got directly, Adam. Did you want to hear those again, just in case?
Sure.
So these came in late yesterday. I've checked and I've been able to log into both my ETS WAP, I'm sure there's a way to say that, account, and my EU operator holding account. I understand we are to be reassigned from the UK to France. And then it continues, do we use the UK and the current accounts for compliance year 2020? Do I need to set up an account in France for 2020 or for compliance year 2021?
Yeah, so we'll just walk back through that really quick, because that really sets the stage for what's going to happen next for us. If you're like that operator moving from the UK to France, Universal, myself, Juan, and regulatory services will help move that monitoring plan as required by France. and then we will engage them and look at your footprint and say, do we anticipate your operation needing a registry account this year? I.e., have you reported in the past? What does your footprint look like? If the answer to that is yes, then we will ask if you want to engage with AES and stand up a new registry account in France. But those accounts and monitoring plans and ET swap all still live with the UK through this 2020 reporting cycle. And so really that whole transition is not going to happen until after April 30th of this year. I know there's lots of communications going around about that transition and a lot of member states wanting to get their ducks in a row. But right now, the main focus for member states is closing out 2020. Obviously, the main focus for Universal and AES is closing out 2020 mandatory obligations and then looking forward about how we push people into the next things.
And as far as, and I saw this in an email as well earlier, was from just keeping everyone honest from the deadlines and dates. So that's something we're going to continue publishing as always. And I mean, obviously you guys are in the GRS team and the emissions team are keeping track of it for everyone that's registered with us, but we will have a summary that goes out with what those key dates are and deadlines specific to what's coming up.
Correct. We'll follow up this webinar today with communication with some of the highlights from this, as well as a roadmap for what's going to happen going forward.
Right. I'd like to have that backup. All right. Laura, was there anything that you saw in the background that came in via email that I've missed?
Actually, I just went through all of the questions and it looks like they've been addressed. I think there is one, Adam, specifically that, let me pull it back up here. Due to the pandemic, our department flying will have emitted less than 1,000 tons CO2 in total global operations. Do we qualify as a small emitter for compliance year 2020? Will we not have to surrender carbon credits this year?
Yeah, so and we'll just step back real quick and say that that's a very, very common theme. Obviously, with the pandemic, everybody's flying has been reduced in a big way. So yeah, a very small set of small emitters are actually going to have to report this year. So just because you've reported in the past, don't assume you'll be reporting again. And we will be reaching out directly to operators if we already haven't. A lot of you have already heard from us so far this year, but if we think that you're either in anywhere near a threshold, or B, we've got a kind of predetermined process where you want to see that report regardless, we'll have already initiated that. For anybody else who wants us to initiate a report, even though they know they're underneath or far under the threshold, but want that for official, kind of your official file for the year, we're glad to request that through Eurocontrol on your behalf. But remember, it is a 400 euro charge for that feeling of ease that your data is correct. But with
Put a
that,
price on peace of mind, Adam, can you?
Price, I feel peace of mind. And that's what a lot of this emission stuff is about, right? It's peace of mind, right? So anyway, I'll just recap real quick. We'll let everybody go. We've got our renewals coming out here very soon, unless you have 2020 reporting that needs to be resolved. With that renewal, once you've renewed, then you'll get your certificate of engagement with the service, as well as we'll start talking about monitoring plans and transitioning. If you do have operations in 2020 near the threshold, we'll be talking to you about reporting for EU ETS. Yeah, and that's about it right now. But I hope this was a much better format. I hope this really worked for everybody. I hope talking it through is more valuable than trying to read a 4-page or 5-page email from me. Thank you, Marcelo. I saw your comment. I appreciate that. And if this is something that you like, we could set these up on a more recurring basis so that we stay closer and everybody has that peace of mind that you're talking about, Annabelle.
Absolutely. So again, thanks to all who joined. Much appreciated. I think Adam's got an idea there. We can do another check-in depending on what the news is as we get further into the reporting season. We'll send out the link to this later this week and a couple of keynotes as well from Adam. We'll try to keep it to less than a novel. Somewhere between novella and novel. How's that? Well, much appreciated. Thank you so much to our panelists, Chris, Rick, Juan, and of course, Adam. Appreciate the time putting this together for everyone. So we'll go ahead and let you go. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Cheers, Adam. Bye.
Thank you.